And you won't really find the word team in the Bible. It's more of a term that we find in our culture. But the essence of what a team is, you find all the way through the Bible. There are multiple examples of teams in which individuals who are different will come together to work together to pursue a common purpose. And it's a thoroughly biblical concept. Perhaps the closest concept to the idea of a team is the body imagery that we find in the New Testament to speak about the church as being a diverse, differently gifted group of people who come together to accomplish a common purpose. So let me just read from 1 Corinthians chapter 12, just as we prepare to think about this area. Paul writes, "There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in every one it is the same God at work. Now to each one the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. To one there is given through the Spirit a message of wisdom, to another a message of knowledge by means of the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healing by that one Spirit, to another miraculous powers, to another prophecy, to another distinguishing between spirits, to another speaking in different kinds of tongues, and to still another the interpretation of tongues. All these are the work of one and the same Spirit, and he distributes them to each one just as he determines. Just as a body, though one, has many parts, but all of its many parts form one body, so it is with Christ. For we were all baptized by one Spirit so as to form one body, whether Jews or Gentiles, slave or free, and we were all given the one Spirit to drink. And so the body is not made up of one part, but of many." Let me start off by just saying a little bit about myself and team leadership that I've experienced, so that you've got a little bit of an understanding of where I'm coming from. I've been involved in two significant ministries. As you heard, I planted a church in Birmingham in 1999. I planted with two others. We were a team of three when we began the church. We had a small group of people who were with us as members, but we were a relatively small group, but we worked as a team. And over the course of 11 years that I was pastor of the church, we grew to be a church of about 300 or so, and many more who'd passed through in a city centre ministry. And I discovered that much of the work of leading the church was not just preaching and teaching, but it was building teams to enable the church to grow. So as the ministries grew, we needed to build ministry teams. So we began to add new staff to the church to help take on areas of ministry. We had to construct volunteer teams for the various elements of the church's ministry. The student work, the children's work, the youth work, the care of the older people in the congregation. So a whole structure of teams needed to be assembled with leaders who would lead those teams. And we needed to construct an infrastructure for the church. So those who would take on responsibility for finances, communications, and just other essential aspects of the organisation. Then 8 years ago, I became the national director of our group of churches, a family now of nearly 600 churches. I don't think it's grown 100 since I wrote the profile, but it's pushing up towards that end. And there I was asked to essentially come in and revitalise a network of churches. I inherited a small team that was already in place, but had the opportunity then to appoint new staff and to grow the team and to develop a new vision. Over the course of the last 8 years, the size of the team has probably tripled, and the budget similarly. And again, I found myself having to build teams, build infrastructure. I'm at a very interesting stage at the moment because my original core team, most of the members of that team have just retired or moved to different roles. So I feel I'm suddenly back at the beginning of having to re-recruit a new team to take the work forwards. I found that in leadership, in ministry, and also in church, that in a sense, the more senior leader you become, the more of your time is spent in building teams, and the less of your time is spent in doing active ministry yourself. You end up doing less, and what you do is done through the team rather than done by yourself. And I think that's essential in order for ministries and organisations to grow. It is just inevitable that you have to devote time to building the team rather than to doing things yourself. And that is often a mind shift change for us, because many of us, I suspect, are pioneer leaders who are used to doing things ourselves, and then suddenly we have to work through teams. So being able to lead teams and build teams is, I think, crucial for growing ministry. Teams are essential for ministry multiplication. You cannot multiply and grow ministry without developing teams. Otherwise, you will be limited by what you personally can do. Your vision and your impact will be limited to yourself. Teams become essential to enable ministries to grow. If you don't build teams, either you'll burn out or you won't fulfill the full potential of the ministry that you could develop. Firstly, a simple biblical principle. It seems to me that biblically, a ministry is done by teams, not just individuals. This is a deeply biblical principle that ministry is done by teams. Teams are the way that God grows ministry. You might say that is deeply reflected in the very nature of God himself, who is Trinity, 3 and 1, effectively functioning in a team-like way. But we see this running through Scripture, don't we? Right from the very beginning, for example, we see Jesus. What does he do when he starts his ministry? He immediately recruits a team of disciples to work with him. When he sends the disciples out to preach the gospel, he sends out the 12 and then the 72, he sends them out 2 by 2. He doesn't send them individually, he sends them as a mini team to do that work. When we come into the book of Acts, we see that much of the work of evangelism is done by the apostles together, Peter and John, James and John. There's a team element. We see when Paul engages in his ministry, he almost invariably goes with others. So Paul and Barnabas. Paul then recruits Timothy to work with him. He's building a team. Just read the New Testament letters. Virtually every letter Paul writes with somebody else. They're written by a team. And virtually every letter Paul lists the names of the people he is working with. He is working with a ministry team. He is not an isolated individual. He's working out of a team structure. As we've seen in 1 Corinthians, the church itself, in a sense, is a team. The local church does its work by all the members working together. And I think there are at least 2 elements in which teams are important. They're slightly different. You need teams to do the ministry itself and multiply the ministry. So whatever the ministry is, you grow the ministry by growing a team to do it. So Jesus' ministry, kingdom preaching. You grow a team of disciples who can preach the message of the kingdom. Whatever your ministry is, you need to grow the people who can do the ministry. There's then also another element in which you need the team to establish an infrastructure to support the ministry. Now that's slightly different. So as soon as you have a growing ministry, you need support and an infrastructure that is able to enable that ministry to happen. Somebody in the end has to deal with the finances. Somebody has to deal with the social media presence. Somebody has to deal with the human resources and legal issues. Somebody's got to deal with the buildings. And so therefore what you need is a team of people who are able to do those different jobs. Again, we see that unfolding in the New Testament, don't we? As the church grows, suddenly the apostles can't do everything. They can't preach the word and do the evangelism and organise the feeding of the widows in the church. So they have to basically set up a team to do that job. They need specialist widow feeders to kind of enable them to keep their priority. So you need teams both to grow the ministry itself, whatever that ministry is, and you need teams to do the work of supporting that ministry. The ministry team will generally be people who've often got quite similar gifts because they're doing that ministry. The support will often require quite diverse gifts and specific skills. But either way, the ministry will only grow if you build the team. And often, the key thing that holds the ministry back or disrupts the ministry is problems with the team. Not having a team, having the wrong people on the team not functioning in the way that it ought to. The reality is, if our teams aren't working, the ministry generally is not working. So the whole task of team building is absolutely crucial. So I've discovered the more senior in leadership, the bigger responsibility I've ended up having, the more and more of my time has had to go into team building and team leading. And I think that just goes with the territory of leadership. You end up sacrificing what you can do yourself in order to equip a team to do it better and to do more of it. It's no longer about you, it's about the whole being accomplished. Okay, well, what are some of the key elements involved in building teams and team leadership? Well, I think one of the most crucial tasks, sorry, I should say that there's a PDF for this on your app, so the outline is basically there, we're roughly following it. One of the first crucial tasks of the team leader is basically the task of recruiting the team. One of the greatest responsibilities you have is the task of bringing together the team of people to undertake the ministry. Now, when I planted a church, I had the privilege of starting a team from scratch. When I became national director of our association of churches, I inherited a team. There are different challenges there. When you inherit a team, you may need to change it, develop it, add to it. You've got to work with what you've got, but you're always probably thinking about building a different team for the future. But either way, you are responsible for recruiting to the team. If you recruit the right people, the ministry will move well forwards. If you recruit the wrong people, the ministry will suffer. So recruiting team members is absolutely central. And I think there are a number of key factors that you need to take into account when recruiting people to a team, all of which are important. So you have to know what it is you're looking for. And I would suggest there are 4 things that are absolutely crucial in recruiting people to a team. The first is that the people have the appropriate skills. They have the appropriate skills. You are obviously recruiting people to a team for a reason, to do a job, to undertake a task or a ministry. They must have the skills, the competence, the gift to be able to do that. At its simplest, if you're a church recruiting an assistant pastor, you expect the person to be able to preach, because that's the job. We make a mistake if we recruit people who are not skilled for the role. The danger here is we recruit people that we like, friends, family, even though they're not really properly equipped for the job that needs doing. We need to recruit people who have the right skills. Secondly, and I think this is the area we often neglect, we need to recruit people with the right character. Leadership is not about, or team membership and ministry is not just about having skills. Fundamental is character. And the New Testament stresses the importance of character for church leadership above everything else. If you look at the qualifications for elders, the qualifications for our deacons, it is character qualities that are central. Maturity and the ability to relate to others. Actually, it's those character qualities that mean that you can function well in a team. If you don't have that character, you won't work in a team. So one of the temptations for us is to appoint really gifted and skillful people and to sort of, in a sense, not think their character matters. Most of the reasons for problems in teams are not about competence, they're about character. And so therefore, appointing people with appropriate character is hugely significant. Thirdly, I would say you need to recruit people who are committed to the mission. Committed to the mission. That it's not just that they are people who can do a job, but they passionately believe in the importance of the job they're doing. They are committed to the mission that is being undertaken. So it's not just a job they do to pay the bills, but they understand and they want to be part of the mission that is being undertaken, that they own its outcomes, that they're excited by it. If they're just doing a job, they won't bring energy to the team as a whole. There'll be a drain on it. If they're excited about the mission, they will contribute positively to the whole. So even skills and character are not enough, seems to me, unless the person has a real passionate commitment to what the ministry is. And then lastly, that they will fit with the current team. There has to be a certain measure of chemistry, an ability to work with you, the leader, and with other key leaders. But this is a relationship that's going to work. Now, that doesn't mean you've all got to be identical. One of the real problems many of us make in appointing teams is we appoint people who are just like ourselves. We do that because we are the easiest people to work with. And it's easiest to work with people who are just like you. But having said that, it is important to have people who you can work with, even if they're diverse and different. There needs to be that sense of fit. So again, if I'm interviewing people, I'm not looking just for their competence, their character, their a kind of commitment to the mission, but will they get on with the team? Will they fit with it? Will they complement it? Will they make it a better team? Do they get on with other people? I want to see how they interact with the other staff when they come and visit. Those are key criteria for appointing. And again, we see that, don't we, in the New Testament, in the way that appointing decisions are made. Paul, for example, recruits Timothy in Acts 16 to be his kind of partner in mission, to be his new team member. He's a junior team member, but his team member. Why does Paul pick Timothy? Well, he knows Timothy. Timothy was probably converted under his ministry. He's met him before. He knows that Timothy has been brought up by a godly Christian grandmother and mother who've taught him the faith. Most importantly, for his team purposes, Timothy is a mix of Greek and Jewish. He's got a Jewish mother and a Greek father. He's in a sense bicultural. And for the ministry that Paul has of going and taking the gospel to multicultural contexts, where he wants to be Jew to Jews and then Greek to Greek, Timothy completely fits. He's an ideal team member. And of course, Timothy's got a passionate commission to the gospel, and he's got the gifts for that work. Paul obviously thinks that he can work with him in this father-son relationship. Or think about the recruitment of the people to deal with the issue of food between the widows in Acts chapter 6. Church has a big problem. There's disagreement between the Greek and the Jewish Christian kind of widows. And the apostles haven't got time to resolve it, so they need to appoint a team. So they ask the church, you pick the people who are spirit-filled to deal with this. Now, it's really important to know that what's going on here is this is not just about who's going to serve the food out. This is not just about waiting on tables. This is about managing a real culture clash between two parties in the life of the church. This is a really sensitive issue to be navigated. Both feel hard done by and mistreated. It's about preserving the unity of a multicultural church. So it requires people with high levels of spiritual skill to be able to do that. It's not just about serving out the food and making sure everybody gets some. It's about negotiating all of those cultural challenges. So the right kinds of people are appointed. When you're looking to recruit people into your team, and you're thinking about these different qualities, the key thing you need to be asking is what do we need to make the team better and more effective? Where is the team weak? Where does it need to be strengthened? Again, diversity to be able to do more is what you're looking for as you're growing your team. You don't want a team of clones. You want a team that will be able to extend the gospel reach of the ministry. So as I've built teams, one of the things I've really appreciated is the teams that I've had have been of quite different people. When we planted the church in Birmingham, there were 3 of us who were co-leading. It was a really interesting mix. One of my colleagues was primarily an evangelist and really good at connecting with students. He'd got no experience of running a church, but he was fantastic at kind of connecting with students. My other colleague was great at discipling young men. That was the skill that he really had. I was primarily a Bible teacher and good at putting systems together. And actually that combination enabled us to build the church. We all contributed differently, but it was the combination and mix that enabled the church to grow. We had effective evangelism, the men being discipled, a structure that supported it all. And then when we came to expand our team, we were asking the question, what aren't we doing that would be good to grow the ministry? Not how do we exactly replicate each other, but how do we, as it were, make this an even more effective team that's got greater reach? So I think that's the kind of stuff to look for in recruiting the team, that you are recruiting to grow the ministry and make it more effective. That's recruiting the team. Secondly, envisioning the team. It is your key job as the leader to keep envisioning the team for the mission. The team needs to know what it's there for and what it's working to. It needs to have a clarity of mission. The reason why that's so important is because most teams are full of gifted people who will have loads of ideas. There are lots of things they could do. They've all got personal preferences for what they would like to do. But what you can't do is, as a team, just say everybody can do what they want. You have to keep focused on what the core mission is. Actually, often leadership is about saying no to good things because they're not the best thing and they're not the mission that you're working towards. So you have to turn down some things and some good ideas because they distract from the really central idea. And it's your job as the leader to do that and to keep the team envisioned for the mission. In a sense, when we started a church from scratch and planted, we knew what the mission was from the very beginning and called people to gather to that mission. When I took over an existing organisation, one of our problems is we didn't know what our mission was. We actually didn't know what we existed for. Were we a mission organisation? Were we a pastor's support club? Were we a doctrinal truth-protecting society? We didn't actually know what we were there for. And so we spent actually a long time reflecting on and trying to work out what our purpose was. It was quite painful. It took us at least 3 years to gain some clarity as to what we were for. Well, I found that quite unsettling. As the senior leader, you have to lead through that process. You ought to be able to crisply explain what the ministry is for and what it's about. Having reached that point of clarity, that was incredibly liberating. Because then you can communicate with everybody what the mission is and what you're for. That suddenly helps everybody know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and to make the decisions as to what should and should not be done. Formulating a vision statement, a mission statement, is just a way of trying to crisply encapsulate what the purpose is. And the goal is to try to do that as simply and clearly as possible. Now, what I found as a leader of a team, and this operates at just every level of team. It might be the Sunday school team, it might be the welcome team. Whatever it is, the team has got to have a clear mission purpose. What I found as the team leader is my primary job is to keep reminding the team of the mission. To keep reminding them of what the mission is and why it matters. Because that then shapes what they do. And actually, as a leader, I found I have to keep doing that again and again and again. Repetition, because entropy means that everybody is always tempted to draw away from the mission. Spin apart. As a leader, I find that quite difficult. Basically because I get bored saying the same thing again and again. I'm by nature a pioneer leader. I always want to be doing something new. I want to be saying things in a new way. I hate mission statements because would rather rewrite it a different way every week. But I've learned that actually repeated clarity is hugely important for the team. And that you just have to, all the time, be basically bringing the team back to the mission. Reminding them of what it is, envisioning them, helping them to see its importance, encouraging them to pursue it and achieve it. And nobody else in the team will do that but you. As the senior leader, that's the job that you have to do. Otherwise, it will drift. So I think that's a crucial aspect of envisioning and leading the team. And you just have to get used to being bored with the sound of your voice saying the same things. There's a kind of a creativity that is not helpful in team leading once you've clarified what it is that you want to do. So I would say teams stick together where they are regularly envisioned for the mission they're undertaking. Fourthly, training the team. As the team leader, you bear responsibility for ensuring the team is growing and being trained in both the work that they're doing and the way that they're working together. Now, you may recruit to your team people who've been trained by others and may be very highly trained. That doesn't take away from the need to still keep training your team. And it may be that it's not always you who do the training. You just need to make sure that your team is being trained. You may have to draw in others to be able to train the team in various ways. And this is true both at the ministry level, how do you do your ministry, but it's also true at the organisational level. So you want to make sure that your finance people are being trained in being even better at doing finance stuff, for example. Or your communications people are being trained at being even better in using social media and how they communicate. So you have to train. How do you do that? Again, biblically, there are a number of elements to that. Clearly, it involves some element of instruction. So you have to be instructing the team and the members as to how things ought to be done. But much more than that, it also needs to be by example. Biblically, we train not just by instruction, but by example. Paul says, "Follow me as I follow Christ." People learn from what you show them, not just what you tell them. And you as a leader are on display in the team. And actually, if there's a contradiction between what you instruct and what you do, the team won't learn. Third key thing is you need to be encouraging the team to step out and take opportunities to serve. People learn by having a go, by doing. Jesus sends his disciples out on limited missions. Says, go and do it. And you as a team leader, again, you need to encourage people to step out and take opportunities that will help them grow and extend. And as well as sending them out, you need to then, when they've done that, grant them opportunity to feed back on what's happened, celebrate their successes, reflect with them on what they've learnt, help them to take the next step. Essentially, you're investing in growing your team and your team's capacity to serve. In Christian leadership, I would say that it's also crucial that you take care of the spiritual lives of your team. It's not just about their skills and their competence, but you want them to be spiritually healthy as well. Again, it's easy to neglect that. Now, of course, you probably want every member of your team to be part of a functioning local church with pastors who are caring for them. You don't take the place of their pastor, but you do make sure they are being pastored, and you want to make sure that they are spiritually progressing. So looking after the spiritual health of those who are working with you in ministry in the team is crucially important. I would say you need to build in proper structures for evaluation, for appraisal, to make sure that people have clear goals that you're wanting them to achieve, and that you are then providing them with the support necessary to achieve those goals. Again, clarity is hugely significant. And for many team members, they need a large measure of encouragement. I think in Christian ministry, discouragement is one of the major problems. And you, as the leader of the team, have the responsibility to provide the encouragement to your team. Again, for many of us who are pioneer leaders and self-starters, that doesn't come naturally. We're happy to go without encouragement. We may think it's actually a little bit wet to need encouragement. But most members of our team need us to be encouraging them, to be spurring them on and valuing and appreciating what they do. Well, let's move on to think about some difficult team dynamics. We live in a fallen world. The result of that is our teams will not be perfect. None of us individually are perfect. And if you put a bunch of imperfect people together in a team, you are bound to have tensions and problems. So leading teams is all about managing, in part, the inevitable consequences of the fall. As people miscommunicate, misrelate, fall out, have wrong attitudes of pride and self-importance, all of which affect team dynamics. And you just have to be working to try to overcome those problems. One of the most significant issues in teams is sort of the problem of a lack of clarity of where authority lies. It's hugely important, I think, in teams that there be clarity about the nature of authority in the team. Is the team a team of equals where everybody's voice counts exactly the same? If that's the nature of the team, people will have particular expectations of how they will be treated. When I was leading a church, we were 3 equal elders. We were a team of equals. None of us could say, I'm in charge here. But in other teams, there's a clear leadership structure. So leading the group of churches I lead, I've got a team, but I am the team leader who's accountable for what the team does. And my decision in the end ultimately determines what we choose to do. And it's important that everybody understands how the team functions, where they fit in it, where they have a right to be consulted, to contribute, but also where they know that the decision isn't theirs to make. There needs to be clarity within the teams. That helps overcome some of the potential problems. Often the problems of a team, the greatest problems of the team, are where individuals in the team basically want to have a superior status. They want to be the best. They want to be first. It's a natural human failing, isn't it? And we see it again in the New Testament. James and John go to Jesus and says, when you come into your kingdom, can we be at your right hand, please? We want to be superior to all those others. We want the top spot. It's not surprising that all the others in the team, when they hear about this, get hopping mad. That's a real team dysfunction caused by a sinful pride on the part of some members of the team. But that's likely to happen because we're fallen people. There might be competition between team members. The team stops playing as a team and everybody starts competing to try to be sort of better than others. And we see that in sport, don't we? If everybody wants to score the goal and nobody's prepared to do the hard work of passing it around and building up the opportunity, actually the team will fail. We're not competing with each other, we're trying to achieve a common goal. Some team members will think they've got more to contribute, that they're doing more of it, that they ought to be more acclaimed. There are some who might fall into thinking they don't have as much to contribute. I've seen in team dynamics, one particular problem I've had to wrestle with a number of times is if you have a team member who is just incredibly hardworking, kind of a workaholic team member who can never stop work, never makes time for their family, doesn't take holidays, achieves an immense amount, but assumes that that's what everybody else should be doing. They just set an unrealistic work pattern. The result is everybody else feels guilty. It's actually not a good thing to have an overworking team member who creates an unhealthy team culture. Actually, sometimes we as senior leaders need to be very careful we're not the people creating that unhealthy culture. Or it may be that there is actually somebody in the team who's basically lazy and doesn't pull their weight. They're part of a team, and the joy of a team to them is that they can always leave somebody else to do it. They'll be slow to volunteer. They'll be quick to watch others step up and do things. That's going to create trouble in the team. The challenge is that you as a team leader have got to manage those dynamics and address them. Address them individually with members of the team who are causing that dysfunction. Address them by trying to create a healthy team culture. One thing I might say in relation to both training and difficult team dynamics is there is no excuse or nothing better than spending good quality time with your team. These kinds of team dysfunctions and a lack of training are often the result of not spending quality time together. And I don't mean by that just time doing meetings and doing business. Teams work well where people can spend informal time together. So I've always found when I'm leading teams, it's vital to find times for going out for meals together. It's vital in your meetings to build in time for coffee and chat and relax things. If everything is packed all the time only with business, there's no relating. And an awful lot of the maintenance of good team relationships is actually in the informal time you spend together as a whole. It's the little conversations of asking how the family is, how you're doing. It's the little insight in how a bit of ministry is doing. Invest in that. If you look at the ministry of Jesus, he spent vast amounts of time with his disciples when they weren't doing any active ministry. Just think of all those distances they travelled all around the country, kind of walking together between towns. Vast amounts of travelling time, which in some ways was dead time, but actually it was relating time. For many of us in our teams, we don't give enough relating time. We actually only just do work time. Many difficulties in teams can be, at least to some degree, headed off by making sure that you have that time. Finally, breakdown of relationships within the team. Sadly and tragically, team relationships can break down. Those are often very painful situations. Sometimes a team needs to come to an end, or an individual needs to move on. Maybe a job has been accomplished, a ministry achieved. The team is no longer the best way of doing the work and it needs to be dissolved. Maybe an individual who's working in a role in the team has outgrown the job they have. I see that in churches all the time. Somebody who's been an assistant pastor or an associate pastor now needs to be the leader of their own team. Actually, they've just reached a stage at which they need to move on to a different level of leadership. At that point, they need to be released and encouraged to take that next step. They won't be helpful staying in a team in which they're frustrated and held back. Sometimes, sadly, it's somebody in a team is not performing in the way that is needed. And the result is the team is being held back. As Christians, we're often people who are incredibly gracious. We don't like conflict. We want to be nice to people. And often we are far, far, far more forgiving and generous than secular employers, which is right. But there are points at which a person is inhibiting the mission. And actually it's not good for them to stay in the position that they're in. It's neither healthy for them nor for the work. And therefore it's necessary for the person to leave the team. And you may, as the senior leader, need to remove them. Always the most difficult thing we can do. And sometimes there might just be an irreconcilable falling out. That will often happen where you have people who have different visions or a very different understanding of how the vision should be accomplished. So if within your team you have very different visions or a different approach to how the vision should be accomplished, it will be very difficult to remain working together as a team. It will be an irreconcilable tension. I think we see that happening between Paul and Barnabas in the book of Acts. You remember they've worked together on their first missionary journey. They're thinking of going again, but Paul and Barnabas can't work together because they disagree over taking John Mark with them. I think there's also a more fundamental disagreement between whether to go to new pioneering situations or to revisit the churches they've already planted. And it's obviously heated and it's obviously painful, but in the end they sort of break apart because that's an irreconcilable difference. In a way, outwardly it looks a failure. Actually, the result is more gospel ministry. And we read in the Bible they eventually are reconciled to each other. And Paul's reconciled to John Mark. But there are points at which a difference in vision or a difference in way of implementing the vision is so sharp that it's impossible to keep working together. And for the sake of everybody, at that point, the team needs to divide or a person needs to leave the team. It will not be healthy for either the individuals or for the work for people to try to stay together. And you as the leader of the team have the difficult task of managing that. And sometimes it may be you who realises you need to leave. You might have become the person who now has an incompatible vision, or the way of doing it is no longer the way that the team or the organisation wants to do it. You may be the person who needs to go. And again, in leadership, one hopes that you will recognise that for yourself. There are points at which it is impossible to change the organisation and you need to be the one who leaves it. It's not yours in the end because it's pursuing its mission. Well, that's just an overview of a number of, I think, key issues connected with teams and team leadership. Thank you so much for your attention. Time is up. I hope that's given you some things to think about. I hope it's just reminded you of what you know you need to do anyway. Why don't I pray? Father, we thank you for this time. Please would you help us to be better leaders of teams, give us good and gifted people to work with. I pray you'd help my brothers and sisters to take from this time what is useful and helpful to them. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you very much.